Hey everybody, John Mark here. Welcome to Mark My Words. Today I'm going to talk to you about the first rule of a great civilization. What I'm teaching you here today is not the only rule of a great civilization. I would say there are 3 rules of having a great civilization, and I may do videos on the other 2 in the future. The reason I want to teach you this one today is because it is the most immediately pertinent as far as helping you understand the power of propertarianism when I begin to explain it to you, starting with my next video. And the reason I haven't started doing that already is I am very purposely going through a series of videos here. Several of my videos thus far have fallen under the category of abandoning failed strategies, because people really need to understand that we can't go to the next level by having the failures that we as right-wingers have had in the 20th century. So I've been going through those failed strategies, and now I want to show you the first rule of a great civilization. Once I start explaining propertarianism to you, you're going to see that it takes this number 1 rule of a great civilization and does it more, better, and more thoroughly. It's taking what we did right that made us the most powerful, the most wealthy civilization in the history of the world, and doing more of it. So this video is, in a sense, the last video in my playlist that I'm going to have for people to go back to later, that I'm probably going to call something like Prepping for Propertarianism. And then my upcoming videos where I'm explaining the basics of propertarianism will make up another playlist, Basics of Propertarianism. All right, so let's get right into it. What is the first rule of a great civilization? The first rule of a great civilization is revealed by the first main difference between first world nations and third world nations. So we have to look at the differences between first world nations and third world nations, and there's one primary difference between those 2 types of nations with those 2 different levels of results that I'm going to talk to you about today. If you've only ever lived in a first world nation, you kind of take it for granted. But if you're like me and you've spent quite a bit of time in third world nations, spending time there really prompted me to start asking the question, what is the difference between a third world nation and a first world nation? Why is it so much nicer in first world nations? Why do things just work better? Why do they just get richer? By the way, I have to say this, if our media was worth more than a pile of cow manure, they would be investigating this question more than anything else and broadcasting it 24/7. And I also have to throw this in here. All of you who have read the book Guns, Germs, and Steel, please spare me your comments in the comments section. The unique success and the unique accomplishments of Western civilization are not only due to guns and colonialism and disease. That is not a full explanation of the unique success of Western civilization, because if it was, we could, for example, just switch out 5 million Somalis for 5 million Dutch people anywhere on the planet, and they would produce the exact same civilization. But everybody knows they won't, because the Dutch have gone through a historical grinder that the Somalis have not. So the Dutch have had some civilizational best practices operating in their history for a long time that the Somalis have not. So let's stop pretending that everybody's equal. And the point of this is not to have a contest about who's the best. The point of this is to identify civilizational best practices so we can use them and do them more and do them better. All right, I'll get off my soapbox. What is the first main difference between third world countries and first world countries? When we identify this difference, we have the first rule of a great civilization. The first difference between third world countries and first world countries is the level of corruption. Another way of saying it would be the amount of parasitism. You go to a third world country, the rule of law is not as good. It's not as powerful, so you have a lot of corruption. So your quality of life is not as good. It's very hard to build wealth as a group there, as a nation in a third world country, because there's low trust and thus there's low cooperation. So corruption ruins everything. There's a big book called Why Nations Fail. And the basic point of the book at the end of the day is corruption, in other words, parasitism, ruins everything. Let me give you a couple of examples. I have a friend who lived in India for a while, and the point of this is not to say that all Indian people are necessarily like this, or to just slam India. That's not the point. The point is to point out India does not have the first rule of a great civilization going nearly as well as a place like Western civilization or, say, Japan. So I had a friend who lived in India for a while, and I talked to him after he had lived there for a few months, and I said, "So what's it like?" He said, "John, you can't trust anybody here." He said, "I've had to fire several people for blatantly stealing money from my company." He said they consider it high status to rip you off and get away with it. He said, let me give you an example. I was eating in a mom and pop restaurant, and the owner of the restaurant starts bragging to me. Remember, I'm a customer. I'm sitting there with my family. And the owner of the restaurant starts bragging to me that they get all their ketchup for their restaurant by stealing it from the McDonald's down the street. Like this is some clever thing, and he thinks I'm going to think this is high status of him. And I'm sitting here thinking, no wonder this is a crap hole, because you guys are evil. You act in evil ways toward each other. Now, to be fair, they're caught in a corruption poverty spiral. This is the case in all these third world countries. It's one of those chicken and egg things. Which one comes first, the poverty or the corruption? They just reinforce each other. The more corrupt it is, the more poverty there is for most people. The more poverty there is, the less people feel like they can afford to be the one honest guy in the room. Because if you're the one honest guy surrounded by a bunch of corrupt snakes who will rip you off at the drop of a hat, you're a sucker. So a lot of these people feel like they can't afford to be honest. This is what you have in these third world countries, a corruption, poverty spiral. And even some nations like China that have been lifting themselves up out of deep, widespread poverty. And of course, there's still a lot of poverty there, but they still are not really pulling themselves out of this corruption problem. So for example, I had a friend from China who was in the United States as a student. And I said, do you want to stay in the United States when you're done with school, or you want to go back to China? She said, oh, definitely stay in the United States. I said, oh, really? Why? She said, well, it's just better. I said, what do you mean it's better? She said, well, let me give you an example. When I go to the store to buy chicken in China, I don't know whether I'm getting chicken or cat meat. I said, really? Aren't there rules and laws against that? She said, yeah, but it's corrupt. People know people. People get away with it. See, so their rule of law and their enforcement of the rule of law has not caught up to Western civilization in that regard. The number one difference between third world countries and first world countries is the corruption level. There's more parasitism, there's more theft, there's more lying, there's more violation of the silver rule, which is don't do unto others as you would not have done unto you. Lying, deception, parasitism is a way of life in these places. Lying and deception is the way parasites parasite. Theft, taking advantage of somebody, requires deception. Parasitism requires lying. I want you to remember that. Lying enables parasitism, which produces a corruption poverty spiral. And this is very hard to escape from because there has to be a critical mass of people in the nation or in the group who act honestly before it becomes worth it for the average person to act honestly as a habit. So this is why there are very few first world nations in the world, because this is a very hard spiral to escape from. Because you have to punish so much parasitism before it becomes worth it for the average person to act honestly on a normal basis that it's just very difficult to do. That's one of the big reasons why the only first world nations on the planet are the nations of Western civilization, and then basically you've got Japan. And South Korea is learning pretty fast, Singapore's doing pretty well, Hong Kong's doing pretty well, they're tiny. And that's it, folks. Everything else is third world, or at best second world. So this is the first thing I want you to see. I want you to gain a massive appreciation for Western civilization, because the historical events and the historical grinder that we went through to get to the place where we could eliminate parasitism enough to have a relatively high trust civilization like we have, it's very, very remarkable. So lying enables parasitism, which produces a corruption poverty spiral. On the other hand, punishing parasitism and operating in truth brings an honesty wealth spiral, or you could call it a trust wealth spiral. This is what Western civilization did better than anybody else. That's why we got richer than everybody else. In this kind of an environment where you have an honesty wealth spiral going, or a trust wealth spiral, if you're an average person and you act dishonestly or corruptly or parasitically, there's a much higher probability that you'll get caught and be punished for it than in a third world nation. So most people just don't do it. And of course, this kind of a system, having good rule of law for many hundreds of years, trains the population after a while too. Most people act honestly because it's lower risk and higher reward to do that. So when you get this going, first you have a high trust environment, so people are incentivized to cooperate and exchange honestly with each other rather than parasite off each other. And then people get rich. Why? Because people start spending their energy and their ability adding genuine value to their fellow citizens rather than spending that energy and ability figuring out how to rip each other off And when you don't have to spend so much energy making sure you don't get ripped off and dealing with parasitism attempts on you all the time and retaliation attempts on people who are trying to parasite off you, when you don't have to deal with that, when your rule of law deals with that, you have so much more time and energy to simply focus on coming up with value-add solutions to help your fellow citizens honestly. So this unleashes the positive potential of your population and you get rich. Your nation gets rich. So Western civilization, we had some unique events in our history, and I won't get into it all here. Maybe I'll get into it in a future video. But this caused us to latch onto truth-telling and truth-seeking and jury and rule of law. And we had incentives to punish lies and parasites more than any other civilization. And that's why we got richer than everybody else. That's the number one reason. Basically, what it comes down to is that first world countries punish evil. We punish parasitism and lying much more and much better than third world countries do. First world countries bring the truth to light against the will of large numbers of people who would be parasites if they could get away with it. And the way first world countries do this is with organized violence. In other words, a team of men organizing a system of rule of law and organizing violence against parasites to enforce it, to punish parasitism. Please understand, I'm not talking about random violence. I'm not advocating you go out and do random violence. I'm talking about organized violence. We just think of it as the police today in America, for example. Well, the police punish you if you break the law. Well, yes, that's how it works. But I'm pointing out the mechanism of it because this is going to be important for you to understand once I start talking about proprietarianism. Good rule of law is, in essence, team defense against parasitism. Now, obviously, we're not doing this perfectly in Western civilization and in America right now because there's a lot of parasitism and we grassroots right-wingers are really sensing that. But you need to also understand that Western civilization has already done this better than anybody else. And the problem is we just started falling behind the parasites in the 20th century and we started going backwards. So proprietarianism, what it does is it catches us up. It's like having a pretty good basketball team that suddenly starts losing because we make some mistakes and other teams get stronger. And then we add Michael Jordan to our team and then we're unstoppable. That's what proprietarianism does for Western civilization. It makes our team defense against parasitism unstoppable, impenetrable. It just takes what we were already doing pretty well and takes it to the next level, enables us to do it better. One of the things that proprietarianism really helped me with was that the line is not so much, say, capitalism versus socialism. Because when you say capitalism, what do you mean by capitalism? Do you mean crony capitalism? Because that's not good, that's corruption. Or do you mean capitalism that's not crony capitalism? When you start thinking in terms of parasitism or no parasitism, that's what clarifies your thinking. And it also helps you dissect what's okay and what's not okay when you're looking at the top segment of society, the elites as you might call them. Because we know that there's no way to organize a society except to have 20% of your people organizing the other 80%. You can't organize it any other way. But the question is that 20% that organizes the other 80%, to what extent are they being allowed to be parasites? If they're being parasites, and proprietarianism has a very specific definition of what constitutes parasitism and what does not, and I will be sharing that in future videos and explaining it. But the point is, if the elites are being parasitic, that is not good. If the elites are not being parasitic, that's fine. They're just organizing the other 80% in an honest way. So learn to think in those terms. Parasitism versus no parasitism. And that helps you cut through all of the other isms and political confusion and terms that are put out there that are not well defined. So I've been talking a lot about corruption. We also need to talk about leftism, because leftism basically boils down to parasitism. Leftism basically amounts to using fake morality as an excuse to steal, as an excuse to make claims upon other people's property. It's a violation of property rights. Leftist policies, when you go down the line, basically amount to violations of property rights couched in moral language. You should do this, you should do that, and if you don't, you're an evil person. All of it boils down to theft at the end of the day. So good rule of law that protects property rights also eliminates leftism, and that's what propertarianism does for us. When you eliminate leftism, you start to get richer and richer as well. You look at even Western Europe versus the United States of America. The people that came to America were the adventurous types. They're the types that value opportunity more than security. You look at Western Europe today, they tend to value security a little bit more than opportunity. And they can somewhat get away with it because Big Daddy USA is paying their military bills, and because they have an average IQ of around 100, these majority white nations in Western Europe, and they have pretty good rule of law that has cut out a lot of parasitism, so they can afford a little bit of redistribution. But even if you look at their systems of rule of law, they are not set up to allow people to take risks as easily in business and in starting companies and in being innovative as in the United States. That's why the United States of America is the world's primary engine of innovation, because we have been the most resistant to leftism, and we have pretty good rule of law, even though it's far from perfect, but we're going to improve it drastically, and propertarianism is how we do that. So I needed to talk about leftism as well. Leftism basically boils down to parasitism. If you let leftism run amok in your country, especially if you don't have a tremendous amount of human capital and other wealth built up, you are going to have a lot of trouble. And the more you can eliminate leftism and all forms of parasitism from your nation and your group, the more prosperous you are going to be. So what I want you to see here is a nation's laws and system of rule of law is the first key to everything. The strength of your team of organized men to create laws that outlaw parasitism and then enforce those laws, that is the key. Because as I've been explaining in previous videos, there are huge numbers of people on this planet that will want to be parasitic if you allow them to do it. And you can't stop them from doing it just by preaching to them. Because they don't care about your preaching, because that's not their strategy. That's not what they instinctively gravitate to. And so what we have to do as right-wingers is outlaw parasitism and punish it. A lot of these failed strategies that I've been talking about, they're a failure to outlaw parasitism and punish it. Where a nation falls, or where a group of people falls on a simple scale, determines the quality of life of that group or of that nation. And that scale is the parasitism scale. You could also call it the parasitism lying scale. How much parasitism do you allow? How much lying do you allow? Wherever you fall on that scale determines the quality of life in your nation. The first rule of a great civilization is punish parasites. Propertarianism gives us the ability to punish parasites better than we ever have before. It gives us the ability to have a better quality of life than any group of people in the history of the world have ever had. Just like Western civilization produced the best quality of life any group of people in the history of the world had ever experienced, and now we're feeling our quality of life slipping backwards because we're slipping backwards on the parasitism scale, propertarianism pushes us forward to a better quality of life than ever before by enabling us to punish parasitism better and more thoroughly than ever before. And it will make it so that our descendants never have to fight this battle again. Propertarianism is the conservative group success strategy codified into law and into a system of governance and continuous enforcement of that law. Propertarianism is the strategy that made Western civilization great, codified into law. Punish parasitism and punish lying, which is the doorway to parasitism. That's the first rule of a great civilization. I'll close with this, and this is important. I've seen some comments on a couple of my videos expressing disbelief that it's even possible to eliminate most or all parasitism. And I understand that because before I came across Curt Doolittle and propertarianism, I basically understood the problem. I just didn't know how to solve it. I couldn't model a system of government or governance in my head that would eliminate the parasitism of the elites especially. I thought even if we can kick the bums out and put ourselves in charge, 3-4 generations later, we're going to have all the same problems again because people are corrupt and there's no way to stop them from being corrupt. But then when I came across propertarianism, I realized that this system accomplishes that, as you will see in my upcoming videos. But some people, they just say, people are too corrupt, there's no way to get past this. And they're identifying the problem correctly. The problem is, how do you keep powerful people from getting corrupt and screwing everything up with parasitism? And leftists, of course, from doing the same thing. but I'm telling you it is possible to do. Let me give you this example. Imagine you're living in a third world country and you've never known anything else. You don't even know that Western civilization or, say, Japan even exist. You're not even aware of those civilizations. You're just accustomed to a third world life, the corruption poverty spiral. That's all you know. So I could walk up to you and I could say, you know, it's possible to have a really wealthy nation and a really great lifestyle. And I could describe to you what a first world nation in Western civilization is like. And I could even explain to you how to accomplish it by eliminating parasitism. And if I explained all that to you, there's still a significant chance you simply wouldn't believe me because you've just never seen it before. You might think it's impossible because you've never experienced it, and that's understandable. So this commenter here, he's saying the human tendency to be corrupt is too powerful to be overcome by any system of law or government. And I get that because I was kind of the same way. I wasn't saying it was impossible, I just didn't know how to do it. The same way if you would have asked me back in the flip phone days how to take cell phones to the next level, I probably wouldn't have known how to do that either. But Steve Jobs knew how. He figured it out, and he did it. The basic infrastructure and technology of the cell phone was already there. It was just that next level innovation of the touchscreen that made it even more amazing. So what this commenter doesn't understand, and what I didn't fully understand before I came across Curt Doolittle and propertarianism, is that Western civilization already stamped out corruption to a massive extent. I mean, what we've done is amazing. We already stamped out so much parasitism and corruption, we just take it for granted, but you have to realize we've already taken it like 85% of the way. That's not an exact number, I'm just using that as an example so you can get my point. But let's say we've taken it 85% of the way. That's why we have a first world nation. You go to a third world nation, they've taken it maybe 30% of the way, or 50% of the way if they're lucky. So the reason we have a first world quality of life is because we've already stamped out so much corruption and parasitism. That's why we have the incredible accomplishments that we have. That's why we dragged half of humanity out of ignorance, poverty, and disease. And there's some more to it as well, but this is the key thing that you have to have in place, without which you can't do anything really. The problem is we just fell behind the parasites in the 20th century, and this is clouding everybody's vision, and they're all focused on this, and they can't see the greatness of what we've already done, and that we just have to take it that last, say, 15% of the way to overcome the parasitism that we fell behind in the 20th century. And we take it that last 15% of the way the same way we did the first 85% of the way, punishing parasitism. All right, now we're ready for you to absorb the basics of propertarianism, so my upcoming videos will be about that. It's actually very simple at its core, but it's very, very powerful. I can't wait. The last thing I'll remind everybody of, if you haven't seen my previous videos, this is not just pie in the sky theory. We are going to have a chance to implement this because the most likely outcome by far of the situation we're in right now is there's going to be a civil war in America. That's virtually certain. I'm not calling for that. I'm predicting that. I call for peaceful separation, but I predict a civil war. Then the most likely outcome of a civil war is the grassroots right wins it. That is by far the most likely outcome. So each and every one of us needs to be thinking very heavily about and getting knowledgeable about the best form of government to implement at that point, because we are going to have a chance to implement something better. And we can't implement something that does not address the weaknesses of what we had before. We have to implement something that takes one of our key strengths, punishing parasitism, and does it even better than we did it before, so that our descendants do not have to fight this battle again. Propertarianism is what we need to implement. I can't wait to start teaching you about it. We'll see you soon. How much longer do we want to play trench warfare with the left? How many more times are we going to have to fight this battle? You know what my answer is? 0. 0 more times. This is going to be the last time. And if that doesn't get you excited, I don't know what will.